influential, long-serving ones in each case, proposing an idea jointly to tackle the jobs crisis. You may think we're making it up, which is why we wanted to put a picture of it. You can see their names: Charles E. Schumer, Orrin G. Hatch. Democratic Senator Schumer and Republican Senator Hatch are writing an op-ed calling for a simple plan. They say companies will not have to pay payroll taxes on anybody they hire this year. The key catch: those employees have to have been out of work for at least 60 days. So what's the plan, the cost, and will the D's and the R's stop spiting each other? Joining us from Washington, Senator Orrin Hatch. Senator Hatch, we appreciate your taking the time. You actually walked through how this would work, how much it might potentially cost in the short term via lost taxes. But one key question I had for you, I mean, it sounds great. You're going to hire people who've been out of work for 60 days. Obviously, we have millions of people in this country every month who are hired. There's just more who actually are fired. But are you worried you're just going to see a replacement, that employers will hire the same amount of people that they were before? They'll just hire ones who've been out of work for 60 days.
No, their cost of employment would have to go up over the year's period of time. What they would do is they would save the payroll taxes on any employees that they hire who've been out of work for over 60 days, as long as they're not members of their family. And that would really cause a startup right now for employers to start hiring people. It really makes sense. For instance, if we could hire 3 million people under this bill, it would cost about $7.6 billion the first year. Now, we have to find offsets for that between now and 2015 over that period of time, but we'll be able to do that. The fact of the matter is it's a very small cost to get 3 million people into work, and you can exponentially go up beyond that. It's a very, very smart thing to do. It's a lot better than giving tax credits, which you have to wait for, are hard to administer, could take over a year before you can get any return. Business people aren't going to move on that, but they'll move on this right off the bat.
And your point is, you're saying, just hypothetically, 3 million workers hired under this plan would cost about $7.6 billion, which certainly doesn't sound as much as some people would say. But what you're saying is you're going to force, by the way this is handled over time, it to be deficit neutral. I mean, as you know, we were just obviously speaking to Mr. Elmendorf about the deficit crisis.
Well, it would have to be deficit neutral, or I wouldn't support it, and I don't think Chuck Schumer at this point would support it either. And it's really pretty good when you get a liberal like Chuck with a conservative like myself, both recognizing that the way to really give incentives to employers to hire people is to really give incentives, and give them now, and do it in a way that basically we have to pay for. And there are a number of ways that we can pay for this, there's no question about it. But this would be a lot better, spending $7.6 billion for 3 million people, than going out and getting another $800 billion that we just throw down the drain, which is what has really happened in the past.
To be clear, though, with you and Senator Schumer, this proposal would not be a part of the $400 billion left to be spent of the stimulus. I know most of that obviously has been allocated, but this would be additional, correct?
Well, I don't want to tie Chuck into how we pay for it, but certainly that would be one way we could, as we've got all kinds of TARP funds left, we've got stimulus funds left, and this could easily be paid for with those funds. But there are other ways we can pay for it as well. But the important thing is that we'd be doing something now. Business people would benefit greatly by it. They would save a lot of money in the process. They'd be able to hire people they wanted to hire. They wouldn't be able to hire their own personal family members and get away with this. And they would have to have higher employment at the end of the year than they had at the beginning. All of that would work, I think, in the best interests of the country, best interests of employers, but above all, the best interests of employees who need jobs right now. We have an effective unemployment rate of 10%, but if you go to the underemployment rate, it's really up around 17%. That's the real unemployment rate that we have to be faced with.
Right. Senator Hatch, let me ask you a couple of questions, related topics, but very important. America is under the perception that nobody in Washington is interested in anything other than being reelected, and that our system itself, our system of governance, could be bringing us down. And they are saying that regardless of whether they're Democrats or Republicans. The filibuster seems to be a place this is front and center. We all learned in school that when you have a majority vote, that's what rules in the Senate. And yet now it is just commonly assumed that you have to have 60 votes because the party in the minority, in this case Republicans, will filibuster. There was a study done that showed in the 1960s, 8% of major bills faced a filibuster, and now it is 70%. That's a terrible thing, isn't it? Or am I wrong?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, the Senate is where we stop really bad stuff. And by the way, they're not all filibusters. The minute Harry Reid files a bill, he files cloture. In other words, indicating that he's going to make it a filibuster, or at least blame us for having a filibuster. We'd love to work with Democrats, but take a look at that health care bill. I mean, my gosh, all three entities that put out health care bills, the Help Committee, the Pelosi group, and of course Reid in the end and his group, none of them asked one Republican to participate until after they'd come out and said, this is what we're going to do, take it or leave it. And frankly, that's not the way you legislate around here, and it was an arrogance of power. They had 60 votes. They thought they could just do anything they wanted to do, and of course, that's what we wound up with. Now,
well, technically, you only used to need 51, but you, sir, said to my colleague Chris Matthews that you think we need a super filibuster for the health care bill. We need 70.
No, I didn't say that. I do think 60 is a good threshold, but let's be honest about it. We're not a democracy. We're a representative republic. And the Senate is the place where we really have to deliberate on these bills. And one reason we do is because of the filibuster rule. If we didn't have the filibuster rule, we'd be just like the House. An arrogant majority could ram through anything they wanted to, and frankly, the country be damned. And that's about the attitude that they had over in the House on this bill. Unfortunately, the Democrats had the same attitude in the Senate. The Scott Brown changed all that, because once they realized they no longer had an absolute 60 votes, all of a sudden they realized, hey, it would be good to work with Republicans maybe. Maybe we could get something done if we do that. That's what really makes this country great, is that when we get together in a bipartisan way and try to do what's right for our country. But I got to tell you, there was no bipartisan work. It was just take it or leave it, Republicans. We got enough votes, and we're going to ram it right up your noses. And that wasn't very good.
I would certainly think a lot of people would agree with you on that, although certainly when you look back in the 90s, the Democrats did not exercise the filibuster as often as the Republicans
Oh, yes, they did. Oh, yes, they did. Let me tell you, it was the Democrats that started using the 60-vote threshold. That started under George Mitchell, who was a great leader, by the way. Yes, but the records of filibuster use have
been set just this year and last year.
No, they used it back then. They used it on every important bill. It was over and over. They actually were the ones who started it. But to be honest with you, they're not all filibusters. It is not a bad thing on controversial legislation to require a bipartisan vote of at least 60. And in this particular case, in health care, you would hope that you would have a bipartisan vote. In the case of unemployment, think what it would be if you just turned this country over to the unions. And that's what the Democrats would like to do. And not because they think that's the right thing to do, but because that's their biggest hard money and soft money supporter in this country, or the total union movement. And I don't blame the unions for wanting that kind of power, but the only thing that stands between total power on one side or the other is the United States Senate. That's a pretty important body, and I've been here 33 years, and I can tell you it works over the long run. If you work together, if you try to work in a bipartisan way, look at all the bills we've worked on all these years that we've been able to get together on, because there's been a willingness on both sides. But right now, there has not been a willingness.
Senator Hatch, just one thing I do want to make sure, because I do check my facts. I have a transcript here of the interview with Chris Matthews where you said, if you pass a health care bill and you don't get at least 70 votes.
Oh, no, I did say that. No, I said in order to get something that affects 1/6 of the American economy that is so important, you ought to at least get 70 or between 70 and 80 votes in a bipartisan way. That's different from saying that you have to have 70 votes for a filibuster. No, I agree with the 3/5 rule, the 60 votes. And it works for both sides. Democrats have been able to stop what they consider to be Republican excesses, and they loved the filibuster rule when it involved what they consider to be Republican excesses. And of course, Republicans, this is with only 40 votes. It was one of the only tools that we had left to maybe preserve freedom in this country.
All right, and a brief final comment too. Speaking of bipartisanship, Ben Bernanke perhaps is the epitome of that. Under both the Democratic and Republican president. You, sir, have said you support his renomination, right?
Hey, you're a good interviewer. You bet. I'm going to support Ben. I think Ben, do I agree with everything he's done? Of course not. But the fact of the matter is he's a very smart guy. He understands it. He's been through the ropes. I think once he gets confirmed, I think he'll do a great job. And I've got to tell you this, I would be terrified what this administration would replace him with. And I think Republicans ought to think that through. And I think that's what the Democrats, the liberal Democrats would like. They'd like somebody who's off-the-wall liberal as head of the Federal Reserve. That would be the worst thing that could happen to this country.
Well, Senator Hatch, thank you very much. We appreciate it. And by the way, sir, just so you know, below you it says Senate Republican leader McConnell says Bernanke will be confirmed on a bipartisan basis. That's